I think the cost of living is definitely our next hurdle. I'm seeing it a lot already in the events that we've been hosting over the last couple of months, because the cost of living doesn't just impact people who attend events, but obviously events, it impacts the food truck because their cost of goods have gone up. So it's whether they absorb those costs or have to increase the prices in their menu, which again obviously will affect the customer reaction to those prices as such. So it's really, I think there's lots of ripple effects, including the cost of living, that are impacting events. So it's hard to kind of pin my observations totally on the cost of living, but I think staying engaged and active with working and being prepared for sales not being as they were pre-COVID, but then starting out, you've got none of that insight. So it's all a learning curve really in terms of kind of adjusting to the attendance level at events. So what I'm trying to say, sorry, is that with the financial planning of the cost of goods at the minutes, that's what you need to incorporate into your menu in terms of how you price and making sure that you have a good margin for if an event is low attendance. So at least the sales that you are making do have a good portion, good margin. But in terms of a customer perspective, I'm noticing that they may only go to one event a week versus going twice or three times to an event. So there is going to be a lot less attendance because that might be impacting their activities and disposable income to go out and enjoy. And families as well, it's always a little bit more expensive if you've got more people that you need to pay for rather than an individual or a couple, for example. Definitely themed events, like if they're novelty and themed events, there's a lot more anticipation for people to go to. So obviously you would hope that sales for food trucks would be higher, but then again that the variables could be the number of food trucks that are at the event to cater for these crowds. But still it should be like a recipe for success if you are going to these bigger events, because it is drawing mass people. Versus regular events, you may see a drop in attendance because people, the novelty kind of wears off, or they know that they can come next month and buy your food. So different areas and different events will definitely track different number of attendees, and it's just important to try everything once, because different events, depending on the food that you sell, also isn't a factor to consider. There used to be a toasty food truck that used to trade at our events, but he used to come to the night markets, but wouldn't do as well at the night markets than he would in the morning markets when people are eating toasties during the day. So your food will really dictate what events you do well at. I think dietary requirements have definitely become more of a thing now that food trucks and restaurants as well need to cater for, whether it be vegan, vegetarian, gluten, like you say. So I don't think it works well, from my experience, from what I see in New Zealand, that to be too niche, because there's still not a lot of people that live in New Zealand compared to, like, when I go to the UK, I was there at the beginning of the year. There's a lot of niche food trucks that would potentially just be potentially vegan only as well, because there's a lot more people that live in the UK versus the number of people that live in New Zealand. So you still need, if you can offer a variety on your menu without having too many things on your menu, you will do better in attracting a diverse range of customers versus a niche that just want one thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the one thing to be mindful, though, gluten is something that is a bit temperamental. I haven't got excessive experience in this, but I know that gluten can be obviously quite detrimental if there is a cross-contamination in a food truck, if they say it's gluten-free and it's not. So it depends the territory you want to kind of tread, and being open to having options on your menu, but you don't need to cater for them all. Okay. Having a vegan or veggie option is definitely something that's in demand, based on our experience. And then gluten-free is a bonus as well, if you can offer that. At our events, as I mentioned, all the food trucks that we work with have to have fully compostable packaging to ensure that the whole cycle of our kind of waste is kind of fulfilled. Like, we work with a company called Clean Events, which will make sure that all the waste that's generated from our events is disposed of correctly, and that there's very little kind of waste that goes to landfill. Like, we've got, I think it's about a 95% diversion rate, which could be better. But one of the, people are much more aware of packaging now. So a lot of people would either, if it's compostable as well, will take it home and try and compost it, domestically compost it, but not all of them are. So it's worth doing your homework, and that's going to be really valuable links for you, Jo, to share with the guys, because the whole sustainability approach is definitely something that councils and organisers look to when you're operating. So trying to be mindful of that in your planning as well is really important. There's a sustainability website where I think you can find, like you said, those links in terms of the best suppliers that we can. Innocent Packaging is someone that I've used for years, which I believe are the bee's knees, but I think you may have more insight than I. But they're on a mission to really do well in that space, and I believe that they do. So that's from my experience. So, but there's lots of different competitors out there as well that are trying to kind of own that space as well. So it's worth, again, doing your homework on that. One thing to note as well, though, what's important, if you're operating outside of Auckland, there's not many Clean Events equivalents that can do the commercial compostable element, and so it does end up going into landfill, which is really disappointing when vendors go out of their way to buy this specific kind of packaging, and the whole kind of circle isn't fulfilled in terms of disposable goods. So so that's one thing to consider when you're outside of Auckland. Like, it's deceivingly expensive to buy a truck to fit it out, because you don't get many custom food trucks as such, like you see in the States and in the movies, which they're already kind of got everything they need inside. A lot of them have been like trucks, like delivery trucks that have been converted into a kitchen. So extractor fans and fryers are one of the most expensive things. Extraction is probably the biggest expense if you're looking to cook, obviously, into like convert a truck into a kind of kitchen space. But I think going back to my point of starting small, like you said as well, is key, and then building up and validating your menu items rather than splashing out and buying a truck that might be $70,000-$80,000 and then having to get them out, because there's not a lot of people that. There's only one guy I know in Auckland that can help kitting out food trucks, and he's got a massive long list of food trucks that he's trying to get through. So there's an opportunity for there if anyone wants to actually kit out food trucks. But it can take longer as well than you anticipate, because you're relying on elements to be installed, which might not get installed at the same time, and then you might miss the beginning of the event season, or you might lose the food trucks that got a truck from overseas again, and it came like 4 or 5 months after it was meant to kind of come, and obviously they were tied into all that big expense, and so couldn't afford to necessarily do that gazebo option because they'd already spent. So it can delay the whole process as well. So starting small and building up is definitely worthwhile, considering from a financial perspective. I think it just definitely, like, you can still make a gazebo setup look really cool. Like you just like still spend time on the branding. You can still get like professional A boards created and signage that you can display to make it look cool. So I'm not overly, like, I don't have necessarily a preference, as long as it's great food, great people that are working together. Obviously it's a bit trickier on the vendor, because like the elements of weather and wind can definitely impact a gazebo setup a lot more. So I have a lot more gazebo cancellations than I have food truck cancellations when it comes to weather. But a lot of the gazebos like evolve into a food truck, and then they appreciate and love it so much more, because they don't have to kind of carry things in and out of their car as much, and they're much more kind of capable of battling the elements as such. So from my perspective, I've got no, because gazebos can almost go anywhere as well. A lot of the trucks are massive and they might not fit in a certain space as well. So there's pros and cons again to both. So you've got obviously all your like packaging, or your food needs to be transported safely as well. You probably need like a chiller bin for that, to make sure that you can keep things cold as well is important, especially when you're dealing with meat or dairy. Your signage, like the grill or a fryer, like it's a very minimal setup, and then obviously like a table to obviously serve and make and prepare food on, and then so it's quite a small setup, and you've actually probably got more room in a gazebo setup than you do in some food trucks as well. It's definitely something you can do. It's a little bit more work because obviously once you kind of operate in a certain area like Auckland, for example, you build a customer base which is Auckland based, and they know you and they can follow you and see where you are each week. But when you're roaming from city to city, unless you've got like a strategic marketing plan where you can target people in those cities, it might be a little bit tricky. But as long as, again, doing your homework and research, and you can make like a little tiki tour around New Zealand, it could be done, because your license to Auckland is obviously predominantly Auckland based. But if you're doing the odd event in, say, Tauranga, like you can just do one day events and not have to worry about getting another license, because that council will see that you're already accredited in Auckland, and they use the same practices. That you could definitely do a little tiki tour. But then it's just obviously having the setup to obviously still acquire your stock and getting deliveries and stuff like that. So I think with good planning you could do that, and it'd be lots of fun. So privates are like amazing, because you know exactly how many you're catering for, how many to expect, and regardless of what you make, you walk away with $2,000, for example. There's a lot of going back and forth with private events, but it's definitely worth it. But it's making sure that, again, going back to your planning, that you're actually quoting the right amount to make it worthwhile for you. A lot of the food trucks would have a minimum spend, so you'd need to at least spend $1,000 with us to even make it worthwhile for us to leave the house. Because I see a lot of private inquiries come through our website on the collective, and they want private events for like 20 or 30 people, which is nice. It's nice and intimate. But for a food truck, that's not very many people to set up the food truck, get the ovens on, and like it needs to be worthwhile for your time. And you need to kind of put a monetary value on that. And because you've got to still prep, you still got to still drive the truck to wherever you're going. You still got admin going back and forth with that person. So by welcoming private events, you need to have a minimum quota of amount that you want to make it worthwhile for you. But a lot of food trucks are favoring that line of work, and will probably prioritize private catering over public events sometimes. Like, it's crazy now, up until Christmas now, the amount of private events that are coming through for corporate parties, Christmas galas and what have you. So it's another great source of income alongside the public event. It's really tricky now. We used to rely heavily on Facebook to gauge what the interest was like, to see that if it's got 2,000 people interested, there's going to be a decent turnout. So we need a decent amount of food trucks to cater for that. But Facebook algorithm now, I don't know what's happening with social media. It's not as engaging and reliable as it once was. But with our events, we still like to create a good vibe. So we'd probably pick between 8 to 10 food trucks a minimum at an event, to make sure that it's still an enjoyable experience for the people that attend. But we just have to go hard and heavy with promoting it. And that's definitely up to the event organizers to make sure they promote it. But they also rely on food trucks to make sure that they promote where they're going to be each week, because if we can leverage across 8 to 10 different food trucks and their platforms, it's obviously going to have a bigger reach and engagement. So it's all a team effort to make sure an event does well. It can't be solely necessarily reliable anymore on just event organizers. That's something that we're having to do this year with our foodies that we work with. We really ask them to get behind and promote when they can across Instagram and Facebook. So, because we all want to do well, we all want it to be a success, so we've got to do our bit. They're obviously there to share their love for food, create memorable moments and make a living, but I don't think anyone's doing it just purely just to make a positive impact as such. That's definitely an element to it where they can operate sustainably and socially responsibly, etc. but I think there is a food truck that's starting around Auckland. Forgive me, I can't recall the name, but there are lots of incentives that I've kind of seen on the radar about more kind of positively impacting business that can give back as well, which is really important.
I did come across one, and where, I mean, they were just exploring the idea where they wanted to be able to feed homeless people. So by being in a truck, being able to move around to where their location would be, and then using profits from the food to be able to do that, or at least having kind of a social enterprise charitable van that kind of side by side. And the other one is the Sustainable Food Company, although I know that they have a set location at the moment, but they originally were in an e-van and they did zero waste, vegan. But again, they focus more on catering. So I've seen a couple, definitely.